Hello everyone, this is Jonathan here with the Barrow Family Aquarium, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately after some YouTube searching, not really finding the answers for the things I'm looking for or some of the explanations for some of the things I've noticed. So I figured it'd be wise to make a video to share everyone what I've come to realize and see if it could be beneficial to others in the hobby. So first off, my fish keeping background, I've been keeping aquariums for, 2+ years now. So it's not extremely long, but I am of the personality type when I go into something, I go pretty full bore. So I research my tail off, I try lots of different things, and I don't just usually set things and let them go. So I've been around for a little bit of time, done a lot of research and just sharing what I've learned, but I'm by no means a master fish keeper or anything along those lines. I keep freshwater aquarium tanks with the smaller species of fish, which I'll show today. One of them, this is my somewhat new 38-gallon community tank that's primarily houses one beta and some autos, but we'll show that here in a few. But this video is really about filtration. So I wanted to go over some things regarding filtration. My history has been, I've used sponge filters, hang-on back filters, canister filters, and the combination of all three. So I've tried a lot of different combinations, and I wanted to share what works for me and why I use the setup I use. So my current setup is as follows. I use a sponge filter, which is a 3-stacked, I think those are 10-gallon sponges, but this particular brand, they can stack up to 3, and they've been around for a while, and I have that hooked to an airline tubing and one air pump down there. So, that is my biological filter. So usually you either have a hang on the back or a sponge or a canister when you're starting out, and that filter is doing everything for you. It is mechanically filtering out junk from the tank, and is biologically, growing bacteria to keep the tank healthy. But you can split up those roles, which is what I've done here, and for specific reasons. Primarily the sponge is a great biological filter. Air will be pushed down via the hose. It's going to have to rise and suck water through the sponge pores, and goes up through the top. So this will grow a good amount of beneficial bacteria. The problem is it sucks for mechanical filtration because nothing leaves your tank. So all the uneaten food you have, all the fish poop, if it doesn't land on the gravel and makes it to the filter, it's just going to get sucked onto the sponge and sit there. There's no way to exit the tank, which is one of the reasons there are advantages to hang-on backs and canisters, at least in my opinion, is that crud or muck gets pulled out of the tank. So, with your hang on the back or canister, you're going to have, an uplift tube similar to that in the back that's going to suck all that muck up out of your tank and then get trapped by either the hang-on back or your canister filter. So, that's my biological filtration right there. And my mechanical filtration has varied. So for a while I had, this is a somewhat new setup, so this has only been set up in this manner. But I had other tanks that would maybe have a sponge filter and then a couple hang on the backs. And the pros and cons of that, so the hang on the back would be my mechanical filtration. It would suck water up and all the muck up, and then it would get trapped on the filter floss or filter media and get delivered back to the tank, clean. The issue is, the design of the hang on backs aren't quite as efficient as a canister. So, you know, they're both sucking water up through that tube. But then in here, you know, the water comes all the way down a pipe in the middle, hits the bottom chamber, and then is sort of sucked or forced up through these trays. So, you know, with the hang-on back, it just sort of gets dumped in the back of the unit. At least most hang-on backs. There's going to be different ones with different designs. But it sort of just gets dumped in the chamber and then, you know, is sort of pushed through the filter media and then delivers back to your tank. You know, this is a bit more efficient design, I think, you know, requiring the majority of the water to travel through your media. And we'll cover a little bit, you know, some people will talk about bypass, but we'll get to that in a minute. So, you know, the canister is my mechanical filtration. I don't really care if I'm growing a great biological bed in here because I've got my sponges doing that. I want this to get the muck out of my tank and have it in this container that I can empty and remove so that the majority, or at least a large amount of it, stays out of the tank itself. So these bottom two trays I have, you know, this is a Penn-Plax Cascade 700. I have their standard coarse sponge media here. You know, I want the water to come through with the muck. I want it to hit the bottom tray and get get filtered a bit. And yes, you can put different, a really coarse sponge and then a medium and then a fine and some floss, but I just wanted to keep it simple. So I've got two of the coarse sponges in here. So first tray, big stuff's getting caught. And then in here, I have two of the fine filter floss pads. And you know, they're not too expensive. You know, I used to get my own rolls and cut them to fit my hang on the back filters. But, you know, the time I spent doing that, you know, it's, I just gonna get the pre-cut ones. You know, you can get a big box of them for pretty cheap on Amazon or eBay. So, you know, they fit right in. And they're kind of a pain to cut. You know, they got little notches and holes in them, and you know, you may not get it to fit perfectly right, so you've got an area that bypasses, so I don't want to mess with any of that. So this is my mechanical filter. You know, coarse media to get out some of the stuff, finer media travels through, gets delivered back to the tank. So, sorry, I dropped something here. So, you know, I guess we'll talk a little about bypass. You know, a lot of research on this, you know, people complain, oh my God, there's bypass. You know, on the side of the trays, you could fit a ruler in here, so water's gonna hit the bottom and come up and, you know, and bypass the media. You know, people have put micron fiber around here. They've stuffed some filter floss in there. And my theory, which has been backed up, I actually have an email from Penn-Plax stating this, is it's sort of by design that the chamber is tapered a bit. It's a little tighter fit at the bottom than it is up here. And then if you've got a taller unit, the same thing. But I think you want some bypass. You know, if your water was forced down and the only way for it to escape was coming through these chambers, and let's say you've got a, you know, filter pad in here that hadn't been changed for forever and it's just super clogged and no water can go through, you know, you're going to have a lot of pressure being built up in here because there's no way to escape. At least with some bypass, you know, if as that gets clogged, you can have some water go up the side, and it may, you know, may not pose, you know, this thing popping, you know, a gasket or something someday because the water's so, there's so much pressure in there. So, you know, the bypass is really kind of by design. You don't want it completely sealed. So people putting micron around here, don't do that. They also suggest that, you know, filling up the gaps, you know, you're messing with your flow and the design of the canister. So filling all these gaps in messes with the priming system and with the overall design. So that's not suggested either. And we can see, you know, once I get water, which this is an empty chamber at the bottom, up through this first set of two sponges, you know, it's pretty tight here. So it's really got no other way to go except for up through the fine filter media and then back out to the tank. Sure, some may get along the sides, but, you know, I'm turning this thing over, I think it's about 5 times per hour, maybe. You know, that's at the rated specs, which we'll cover more in a minute. But even if so, even if some bypasses, the majority of the water is going through the filter. So I don't really think that's a big deal. So yes, official word from Penn-Plax, don't mess with your trays trying to remove any sort of bypass. Bypass is there for a reason, and it's a good thing to have. You know, just do your maintenance, you know, on occasion so it doesn't get too gunked up. So the other thing I use, there's some options to use. You know, a lot of people use intake diffusers. You know, they'll put a sponge over your intake on either your hang on the back or your canister filter. I don't like that. You know, I already have a sponge filter that's trapping gunk in the tank that I gotta clean on occasion. So I don't need my canister, which I'm using for mechanical filtration, to have a whole bunch of other stuff that it's trapping there for me to clean out of the tank. You know, we already see that there's some items being trapped on the little suction there, but if I had a sponge on there, that would be even more that gets trapped. And I don't want that staying in the tank. I want that out into the canister that I could remove at a later time. But I do use, so I don't use an intake sponge, but I use an exhaust sponge. So the reason for this is primarily just because of the fish species. You know, in this tank, I keep a beta. Sam Walton back there hiding out. And you can see he can hang around the filter without a big, you know, without much work. Whereas if that was off of there and I had the duck bill, no matter how, either I would have to turn down the flow really low over here to keep everything from blowing around. Yes, it would do a better job circulating the water to get more stuff off the bottom going up the tube. But I gotta keep the fish's health in mind. So I prefer, and this is where I have to compensate with my cleaning ritual a bit more, is that with the type of fish I keep, you know, I keep it pretty calm in here. So there's lots of water turnover, you know, there's lots of mechanical filtration taking place, but there's not a whole, you know, crazy amount of water movement in here blowing this beta around. You know, he can swim pretty comfortably without having to fight a crazy current and chase around the snail who always seems to tick him off just by showing up. So that's why I use a delivery sponge. So, you know, advantage to that, you know, that sponge is going to grow some beneficial bacteria. It will reduce the flow a little bit. You know, with this system, I've got the pipes fully open, which is a good segue into this. You know, this is rated at, you know, 185 gallons per hour. You know, the Cascade CS 700, but there's lots of asterisks with that. You know, where was it tested? Was it down below? So it's pushing water up the tubes? Was it next to the tank? Was it, you know, equal plane? So that number is very, you know, take it with a grain of salt. Plus, did they test it with media or no media? You know, if I've got a whole bunch of fine filter floss in here, that's going to run slower because it's going to be tougher to push through there than if I have, you know, all coarse sponge or something. So, you know, that gallon per hour is going to vary as well because of that. And it's going to vary as well depending on how long it's been running. You know, if I just clean this today, it's going to push a lot more water through that media than, you know, a month from now when it's got more gunk in there. So in general, not that big of a deal to me. At least it's in the size category that should handle this tank, and all I'm looking for it to do is get stuff out of the water column. You know, I just want it to mechanically filter as much as it can without being too hardcore on the fish. So we covered that. You know, diffusers, why I use it, you know, gallon per hour, you know, my canister location. So, you know, I'm on a pretty equal plane with the tank just because it's easier for me to get to and it fits there. So when I'm pushing water, you know, that's the path it has to travel. If I'm down here, you know, the canister's got to push uphill, so it may be a little tougher. So all that's going to play a little bit on your setup, at least regards to canister sizing. But, you know, this is rated for, I think, up to 100, or no, I'm not sure what size the 700 is rated for, but I know on the packaging it's a little bit bigger than what, you know, this tank is, this is a 38-gallon tank. So as long as I'm in the category, I think it's going to be fine. It's doing its job. You know, I got plenty of biological filtration with the triple stack sponges, and I just need that to get the gunk out of the water. So, you know, one other thing I wanted to cover with this, which, you know, was interesting, is the cleaning ritual. So, you know, the easiest way I've found to get into here and clean this so far is, right now it's running, is I would turn off the intake. So that intake hose, it's full of water, I would cut this off so the hose is going to stay full of water, okay? As soon as that's off, this is going to still be pumping and trying to deliver water to the tank. And what's cool with this Penn-Plax is you can see through here, so you'll see the water level start to drop. You know, and as it gets down to the bottom, then I know, okay, it's got a decent amount out of here. I will cut this off so that hopefully I've still got some water in this tube, and then I'll undo the power. If you do that, I then slowly undo this hose connector here. And I haven't really had much water leak out of here. The problem is, if you keep the pressure, if you just cut the power and turn both of these off, you've still got this thing full of water. So when you take these off, you're gonna get like some water spillover. So if you do that method, you know, turn this off, let it run for a bit to get the water out of here. It isn't bad on the motor. It even says in the instructions to do this. Turn this off, then cut the power. You know, then take these off slowly. You may have this a little full, but if you shift this a little bit and get the, the air to bubble through, that water will drop down and you really won't make a mess. Then you could sort of just take this off and you really have just a really small amount of water that you have to, clean up. So that's a great way, when you come back, I usually will open this, immediately open the return, and then you'll see it start to fill up, and then I'll have to do a few pumps. It's tougher the first time because this hose is empty. When you first set up this filter, this hose isn't full of water, so getting this going was a little tricky. But just during on water changes, it's not that big of a deal. So, so the last thing is water changes and gravel vacuuming. So with this setup, I do need a gravel vac because there's not a whole heck of a lot of flow. So, there's gonna be poop that gathers along the bottom that needs to be vacuumed out. So I will just use a hose and a bucket, and that's it. Nothing fancier than that. And I refill as I go. So for instance, this tank, my gravel vacuuming is really my water changes right now. So, maybe once a week, I'll grab the bucket and the hose and I'll gravel vac 3 gallons worth of over here. I'll go to the sink, dump the water, fill up the bucket with 3 gallons of treated water and put it right back in. Then I'll do another section. So maybe there's 3 sections here. So I'm not doing a big 50% water change. I'm focusing on getting the dirtiest of the dirty by vacuuming the gravel. And heck, every 3 gallons that I replace out of this 38 gallon is 8% of the tank. So, I'm doing, maybe 2 or 3 8% water changes back to back just to get the stuff out of the gravel. So, and then I just repeat as needed, depending on how dirty it is in certain areas, I can do maybe just 1. I usually do 2, by the time I make it through the tank, at least this size tank, I need to, do probably 6 gallons of water. So I'll gravel vacuum all this out, get the gunk in the bucket, dump it, put it right back in. The nice thing about that, the water level stays high. It only drops a bit because I'm only taking out 3 gallons at a time. And my filtration system, you keep up and running the whole time. So we will show, in this setup, so this is the community tank with a beta and a few other species. We'll actually go through a species video here at another point in time. Here's my naturally lit similar tank, also 38 gallon. Cascade filter, same thing. This is just mostly lit by kind of some off sunlight, but I do have a small nano up here helping. This is mostly a guppy mating tank. There's one male and a whole bunch of females in here and a couple other odds and end fishes. And then the final one, my primary, is my 75 gallon community tank. So this is my, this one I haven't converted over to a canister yet, but I'm planning on it. So we have a sponge filter back there doing the biological filtration, and then there are two hang on the backs right now that are handling the mechanical. So like these are due for cleaning because the water's flowing over the top of that filter, and you know, you don't see the wheels spinning that great. So these are going to be replaced with a canister as well, but these are where all my beta girls hang out. They think whenever I show up it's time to eat. So that's it, a little 20-minute filtration video. Please, if you got any questions, post them in the comments and I will reply back with an answer or another follow-up video. Thanks for your time. Have a good one.